Yeah. So I think, okay, a couple things there. So the first one is that like Hedron will run with Hex because it's tied in liquidity to Hex to a degree, as well as it's part of the Hex ecosystem. So I guess Hex pumps, Hedron pumps. It's kind of like the logic from a psychological standpoint. Like they're psychologically tied to each other and tied to each other from a liquidity standpoint. The other reason why Hedron would probably run with Hex, at least after Hex does a run and cools off, is because of the deals you're getting on the liquidation auction. So like as Hex goes up, it takes more and more Hedron to get a good deal on that liquidation auction. Like a 50% deal when Hex is 10 cent is a different dollar value than if Hex is 20 cents. Right. So like you need more Hedron if Hedron has a run. So either people are buying it off the market to get those deals, or people who would have been selling some of their Hedron presumably are using it to get cheaper T-shares now that the market price has run away from them. So that's like another like mechanic that ties Hedron to the Hex price. I actually am of the opinion that I think once PulseChain launches, like Hedron and Icosa is going to kind of take a back seat because we have so much going on in the PulseChain ecosystem. Like all these systems that we've been talking about, liquid loans, Power City, all the PH stuff, not to mention PulseChain, PulseX. Like there are going to be so many things diverting attention, and everyone kind of understands Hedron and Icosa pretty well. I think it's going to take a back seat. But honestly, that's just opportunity. Like if the deal gets too juicy, like you could just scoop up bigger bags on the Pulse side or on the ETH side. At least that's what I'm going to be looking for.
Interesting how the psychology of PulseChain being a distraction is actually bullish for accumulating Hedron. You're kind of going in that direction.
Because the fundamental value of it isn't going to change. Your ability to get cheap shares isn't going to change. In fact, it might even be easier because there are two auction houses you got to pay attention to, one on the PulseChain side and one on the Ethereum side. I mean, I'm going to have to update my website to make sure I get the PulseChain data for it too at some point, get the live stats for both chains, but still, it's just the complexity is doubling, and I think it's actually gonna it's like a Metcalfe's law kind of thing. It doesn't get double as hard; it gets like 4 times as hard because it's the square of it.
Right.
I agree with that. I think it's going to be we're facing a problem of dilution, which is why I think so much focus and energy is going into Hex right now, and that's why I think all the price action is going to happen over there is because it's easy to focus on one thing right now. This is the last chance of it being all focused on one thing before that snapshot, right? But then, so as a function of Hex being more expensive, T-shares gets more expensive. So then once the Hedron price is so far down relative to T-shares, that becomes a very attractive buy. And if you look at the Hedron pools, like you can see that price is sitting on the edge of low liquidity zones. So it doesn't take much economic energy in terms of USDC to push the Hedron price up.
Yep.
No.
It really doesn't. The Hedron is so much lighter of an asset, and that's another way of saying it's a much smaller cap token. There's so much less liquidity, so it really doesn't take that much money to move it up. The flip side to that is that it's harder to enter with larger size bags. So actually, Axis, this is something that we haven't talked about that much, but there's a dynamic that we have to consider for these new ETH Genesis whales trying to get into Hex. So like the large players in Hex, some of them have a decent amount of Ethereum, but they already have their Hex position and they have their 10x minting bonuses. So they're good on Hedron. They don't really need to put economic energy in. But as these larger Ethereum whales that want to protect the ETH Hex side of things, especially after the PulseChain fork, because it's their certificate of deposit on the chain that they have a lot of economic energy on, they're eventually going to learn about Hedron, Icosa, and all of that, and potentially want to get a piece of that system as well. And then part of their economic energy might try to go into there too. But if it's too low liquidity, or like it's too hard to, if they keep moving the price up against themselves too hard, it may not be a deterrent, but slow down their ability to move their liquidity in. That's a dynamic we haven't talked about quite yet. That would be good to.
It's going to be so hard for the ETH whales to get a decent enough amount of the supply with no liquidity to trade into on Hedron and Icosa. But, maybe that gives opportunity for them to create a huge candle to draw interest to start people start floating that direction, and then to buy the pullback on that, right? And to provide liquidity there in terms of ETH to buy that pullback. So imagine an ETH whale that's sitting on 10,000 ETH or 20,000 ETH comes in and makes like a 1,000 ETH, or not even, you wouldn't need that much, a percentage,
100.
let's say 10% or 5% of their bag. Yeah. 100 ETH buy, and they move the price. I'd have to do the calculation, but let's just say hypothetically they move the price 200% or 300% with one market buy. Is that going to be enough to entice the 10x minters to offload their bags into then their newly resting liquidity, maybe only 100% off their candle? So that way, on that sell-off, they can absorb a ton of the supply, and then the net difference is that you can still buy T-shares on a discount, right? So then they become, it's a whole new angle for an ETH Gen whale to basically get access to T-shares through the auctions, I guess. And then, so yeah, I could definitely see a play there, an opportunity. And it'll be interesting to see if somebody takes that route. Definitely within the realm of possibility, I would say.
Is that enough?